Family dependency is the grand illusion of aging. You've spent decades assuming blood ties guarantee support. They don't. I see it constantly. Proud men reduced to childlike dependence, watching their dignity evaporate. The stakes are catastrophic. Isolation, manipulation, even abandonment. But there's another path. These 5 pillars aren't suggestions, they're load-bearing structures for your remaining decades. Your future self is watching. Will you build foundations that endure or gamble your dignity on others' convenience? Let me tell you something about modern society that no one wants to admit. We're witnessing the disintegration of the extended family unit right before our eyes. I've counseled countless men in their 70s and 80s who built empires, raised children, and assumed their golden years would be surrounded by loving family. Then reality struck. Their children moved across the country, grandchildren barely know them, and suddenly they're alone with their thoughts in a photo album of memories. The harsh truth isn't pleasant, but it's necessary. The family safety net you're counting on is made of increasingly thin thread. Now, let's talk about financial self-sovereignty. This isn't merely about having money, it's about possessing the freedom to make decisions without permission. When I work with senior men who depend on their children's financial support, I observe a profound psychological regression. Their posture changes, their voice softens, their opinions become tentative. They transform from patriarchs to dependents in a frighteningly short time. Carl Jung understood this dynamic perfectly when he spoke about the archetype of the king. The sovereign must command his own resources, or he ceases to be sovereign at all. I've watched proud men who once led companies and communities, reduced to asking for permission to buy Christmas gifts for their grandchildren. The humiliation in their eyes is unbearable to witness. What's particularly insidious about financial dependency is how it erodes your capacity for truth-telling. When someone else controls your resources, you unconsciously filter your speech. You avoid necessary confrontations. You suppress legitimate concerns. Your authentic self gradually vanishes because authenticity requires the freedom to accept consequences. Consequences you cannot afford when someone else holds the purse strings. Now, I'm not suggesting accumulating wealth for its own sake. That's a pathological goal. Rather, I'm talking about establishing buffers against vulnerability. Start by conducting a ruthless audit of your expenses. Most men I counsel discover they're hemorrhaging money on subscriptions they barely use, insurance policies they don't understand, and possessions that demand maintenance but deliver little value. Next, consolidate your financial information into a system so robust that even cognitive decline can't derail it. The men who maintain dignity into their 80s have created what I call a financial fortress, a combination of automated systems, trusted advisors who answer to you, not your children, and contingency plans that activate under specific conditions. Remember, financial self-sovereignty isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. Every dollar you control represents a thought you can express freely, a boundary you can enforce without fear, a decision you can make independently. When you abdicate financial responsibility, you're not just surrendering money, you're surrendering your voice. The most painful conversations I have are with men who believed their children would manage their affairs with the same priorities they would. They discover, often too late, that even loving children have competing interests, different values, and their own financial pressures. Your daughter might love you deeply, but when faced with choosing between your physical therapy and her child's college tuition, she faces an impossible choice that strains your relationship. Financial self-sovereignty means never putting her in that position. It means maintaining the dignity of self-determination until your final days. It means controlling your own narrative rather than becoming a supporting character in someone else's story. This isn't about distrusting family, it's about loving them enough not to become their burden. Let me tell you about physical resilience. Most men past 60 treat their bodies like retired machinery, something to be maintained minimally until eventual breakdown. This approach is not just misguided, it's potentially catastrophic. I've watched intelligent, accomplished men surrender their physical sovereignty decades before their time, becoming dependent on others for basic mobility. This isn't aging, it's abdication of responsibility to the vessel that carries your consciousness. Strength doesn't just happen. It must be deliberately cultivated, especially as you age. The science is unambiguous. Sarcopenia, the progressive loss of muscle mass, accelerates dramatically after 60 unless actively countered. When I work with men in their 70s who've maintained their strength, I notice something remarkable. They don't just move differently, they think differently. They possess a confidence that comes from knowing they can rely on their own physical capability. What's particularly tragic is how many men misinterpret normal aging processes as inevitable decline. Listen carefully. Fatigue, weakness, and diminished recovery aren't simply getting old. They're often symptoms of correctable deficiencies. Testosterone levels plummet in sedentary men, taking mental clarity and emotional resilience with them. Yet most physicians won't mention this unless you specifically request testing and intervention. Now let's address the fundamental mistake in senior fitness approaches. Walking is not enough. Your body requires resistance, literal pushing against opposition to maintain both bone density and muscle mass. I've seen 75-year-old men double their functional strength in 6 months through progressive resistance training. The dividends extend far beyond aesthetics. Each percentage of muscle gained represents freedom from potential dependency. Nutrition becomes non-negotiable after 60. The margin for error vanishes. Your protein requirements actually increase with age, not decrease as many assume. Most men I counsel are consuming half the protein necessary to maintain their existing muscle mass, let alone build new tissue. This isn't about bodybuilding, it's about maintaining the basic infrastructure that grants you independence of movement. Sleep architecture changes dramatically in your 7th decade. What worked at 40 fails catastrophically at 70. The men who maintain cognitive clarity into their 80s protect their sleep with religious discipline. They understand that sleep fragmentation accelerates cognitive decline faster than almost any other factor. Yet the average senior man accepts interrupted sleep as inevitable rather than addressing the underlying causes: timing of meals, light exposure, evening routines, and metabolic regulation. The mind-body connection intensifies with age. I've observed a direct correlation between physical strength and psychological resilience in senior men. Those who maintain their bodies process grief, adapt to change, and resist depression more effectively. This isn't pseudoscience, it's basic neurochemistry. Physical exertion regulates everything from neurotransmitter production to inflammatory responses in the brain. What's most striking in my clinical work is witnessing how physical capability directly affects relationship dynamics. When you can stand from a chair without assistance, when you can carry your own luggage, when you can play with grandchildren without fear, you remain a participant in life rather than a spectator. Family members relate to you differently. You're seen as still vital, still capable of contribution rather than requiring care. Remember this truth: dependency isn't just physical, it's psychological. Every time you must ask for help with a task you previously handled independently, something shifts in your self-conception. You begin to see yourself as diminished. This isn't vanity, it's your psyche recognizing a profound truth about human nature. We need to feel capable to feel complete. The second pillar demands daily investment. There are no shortcuts, no magic supplements, no technological solutions that replace the fundamental need to move against resistance, fuel your body properly, and protect your recovery. The alternative isn't just physical decline, it's the surrender of autonomy that makes life worth living. Let me tell you about meaningful contribution. There's a peculiar lie we've sold men in Western society, that your productive years end at retirement. The gold watch ceremony marks not just the end of employment, but supposedly the end of significance. This is not just wrong, it's psychologically devastating. I've counseled hundreds of retired executives and tradesmen who within months of leaving their careers developed depression so severe it manifested physically. They weren't missing their paycheck, they were missing their purpose. Humans are meaning-making creatures. This isn't optional, it's built into our neural architecture. When you stop contributing value to others, something fundamental in your psyche begins to wither. Viktor Frankl understood this profoundly when he observed that those who survived the concentration camps weren't necessarily the physically strongest, but those who maintained a sense of purpose. You need to be needed, not wanted, needed. What's particularly insidious about traditional retirement is how it severs you from the hierarchies of competence you've navigated your entire life. For decades you knew precisely where you stood. Your skills were validated through promotion, compensation, and recognition. Then suddenly that structure vanishes. The men who thrive beyond 60 have built new hierarchies to climb, new arenas where their mastery is both visible and valuable. Consider this paradox. Your knowledge has never been more valuable than it is now, yet society has never been less structured to extract that value. The responsibility falls to you to create the channels through which your wisdom flows. I've watched men transform their retirement by establishing mentorship relationships with younger professionals. They're not doing this as charity, They're engaging in a profound exchange where their hard-won perspective prevents costly mistakes. Contribution doesn't require formal structures. Some of the most impactful men I know volunteer at crisis hotlines, where their life experience provides perspective to those in acute distress. Others teach skills they've mastered to those just beginning. Some write not for acclaim, but to ensure their knowledge isn't lost. The common thread isn't the activity itself, but the conscious transmission of value from one human to another. What's most remarkable is the neurological impact of continued contribution. Men who maintain purposeful engagement show dramatically slower cognitive decline. This isn't mysterious. Your brain optimizes for use. When you stop engaging complex problem solving in service to others, the neural pathways responsible begin to prune themselves. Use it or lose it isn't just a catchy phrase. It's a neurological reality. The most satisfied senior men I counsel have developed what I call contributory rituals, regular, structured opportunities to offer their unique value to others. They teach classes weekly, they mentor monthly, they volunteer on a fixed schedule. The consistency matters as much as the activity itself because it creates accountability that transcends mood. You show up not because you feel like it, but because you're expected, and that expectation becomes a pillar supporting your sense of self. What I find particularly compelling is how contribution addresses the existential fear that haunts many aging men, the fear of becoming irrelevant. When you're actively engaged in transmitting knowledge or supporting others, you remain a vital link in the human chain. You're not preserved in amber as a relic of the past. You're a living bridge between what was and what could be. Remember this truth: every man needs battlefields appropriate to his season of life. The competition and achievement that drove you at 40 won't sustain you at 70. But the deeper human need to test yourself against worthy challenges never disappears. Contribution provides those challenges while simultaneously benefiting others. This isn't selflessness, it's enlightened self-interest. By solving problems that matter to others, you solve the most profound problem facing yourself, the need for meaning that justifies your continued existence. Let me tell you about your personal knowledge system. Most men spend decades accumulating wisdom only to watch it slip away because they never built a reliable method to preserve it. I've seen brilliant professionals reduced to confusion simply because they trusted their aging memory rather than creating external scaffolding. This isn't about intelligence, it's about respecting cognitive reality. Your brain was never designed to store the volume of information modern life demands, and this limitation only intensifies with age. Consider what happens when you rely exclusively on internal memory. You begin forgetting names, appointments, medications, conversations, but what's really happening isn't simple forgetfulness, it's cognitive overload. Your working memory becomes so consumed with trying to remember basic information that higher-order thinking suffers dramatically. The men who maintain intellectual sharpness into their 80s aren't necessarily those with naturally superior memories. They're those who offloaded information storage to external systems. What's particularly fascinating is how a robust personal knowledge system affects your social interactions. When you can reliably access your own history, the books you've read, the conversations you've had, the insights you've gained, you bring continuity to relationships. The seniors who maintain rich social connections aren't just naturally gregarious. They remember details about others that make continued engagement possible. They remember previous conversations, shared experiences, personal details that make others feel valued. Now, let's address the practical implementation. Digital tools offer unprecedented capabilities, but I've found hybrid approaches work best for senior men. Physical notebooks for immediate capture, digital systems for organization and search, and analog backups for resilience. The specific tools matter less than the principles: immediate capture of information, consistent organization, and regular review. The goal isn't to create a perfect system, but one you'll actually use under stress, fatigue, and the cognitive fluctuations that accompany aging. What's most remarkable about men with effective knowledge systems is their continued ability to learn new skills. At 75, they're still integrating new information because they're not overwhelmed by trying to remember everything. Their external system handles storage, freeing their mind for what it does best, making novel connections between ideas. They're not fighting their cognitive limitations, they're working with them intelligently. The psychological impact extends beyond practical function. When you know your thoughts and experiences are preserved, it fundamentally changes your relationship with mortality. I've observed profound peace in elderly men who've documented their life wisdom. They understand that elements of their perspective will outlive their physical presence. This isn't egotism, it's the fundamental human desire for continuity of meaning across generations. Most revealing is how a personal knowledge system transforms family dynamics. When your children and grandchildren see you as an organized repository of valuable information rather than someone struggling with basic recall, the relationship dynamic remains one of respect rather than concern. You continue being a resource rather than becoming a responsibility. They seek your counsel rather than monitoring your decline. The implementation requires consistency rather than complexity. The men I counsel begin with simple habits, capturing ideas immediately in a pocket notebook, transferring important information to a central system daily, reviewing and organizing weekly. Over time, these basic practices grow into a second brain that compensates for natural cognitive changes. The system evolves as needs change, but the fundamental purpose remains, extending cognitive capacity beyond biological limitations. Remember this truth: intellectual decline isn't primarily about brain cells, it's about decreasing your cognitive load. By creating external structures that handle information storage and retrieval, you free your mind for what truly matters: wisdom, judgment, and the meaning-making that defines humanity. Your knowledge system isn't just about remembering, it's about remaining fully yourself as you age. Let me tell you about philosophical resilience. Most men approach aging with a psychological framework better suited to their 30s, a mindset that collapses when confronted with the non-negotiable limitations of later life. I've watched accomplished, intelligent men spiral into bitterness simply because they never developed the philosophical infrastructure to accommodate physical decline and mortality. This isn't weakness, it's the inevitable result of living in a culture that pathologically avoids discussing death. The existential crisis of aging isn't about losing function, it's about losing meaning. When your identity has been constructed around capabilities that naturally diminish, something more fundamental than muscle mass is threatened. The men who age with dignity aren't those who maintain youthful appearance or even health. They're those who've consciously reconstructed their self-concept around qualities that can endure and even flourish amid physical limitation. What's particularly revealing is how philosophical preparation affects pain tolerance, both physical and psychological. Those with robust meaning structures process suffering differently. They don't experience less pain, but they suffer less from the pain they experience. This isn't spiritual bypassing, it's neurologically demonstrable. Meaning literally changes how your brain processes discomfort. The seniors who maintain equanimity haven't found ways to avoid suffering, they've found ways to integrate it into a coherent narrative. Now, consider how different philosophical frameworks approach mortality. The Stoics viewed death as natural, not catastrophic. Buddhist perspectives see impermanence as the fundamental reality rather than a cruel interruption. The Judeo-Christian tradition places individual life within a larger cosmic drama. What matters isn't which framework you adopt, but that you consciously adopt one. The alternative, facing mortality with no interpretive structure, is psychologically devastating. Most striking in my clinical work is how philosophical preparation affects family relationships in life's final chapters. Men who've done the internal work of confronting finitude aren't desperately clinging to their children for existential validation. They don't unconsciously manipulate through guilt or dependency. Instead, they offer the profound gift of meaningful closure, of relationships that complete their natural arc without the distortion of unaddressed terror. The practical implementation begins with confrontation rather than avoidance. The men I counsel start by literally writing their own obituaries, not as a morbid exercise but as a clarification of values. What constitutes a life well lived by your own standards? What completion would allow you to face death without the sting of regret? This isn't abstract philosophy. It's the most practical question you can ask, because it orients every remaining decision. What's most counterintuitive is how facing mortality actually increases your capacity for joy. Men who've made peace with their finitude display a remarkable ability to savor simple experiences. They're not frantically accumulating experiences or achievements to outrun death. They're fully present in ordinary moments. Their laughter is more genuine, their attention more complete, their appreciation more profound, precisely because they're not maintaining the exhausting illusion of permanence. The transcendent perspective that emerges transforms your relationship with time itself. When you truly understand your finite nature, each day becomes simultaneously less important and more precious. Less important in that individual setbacks lose their catastrophic quality. More precious in that ordinary pleasures, conversation, contemplation, connection, are recognized as the substance of a meaningful life, rather than mere intervals between significant events. Remember this truth: the ultimate measure of your character isn't what you build or achieve or accumulate, it's how you face the progressive surrenders that aging demands. Will you rage against what cannot be changed, poisoning your final decades with bitterness? Or will you develop the philosophical maturity to find meaning within new limitations? This isn't resignation, it's the most profound form of adaptation. The freedom that comes from facing your own end isn't freedom from death, but freedom from the fear that diminishes life before death arrives. These 5 pillars aren't optional structures. They form the non-negotiable foundation of your remaining decades. Ignore them, and you become a passenger in your own life, carried along by the convenience or guilt of others. Embrace them, and you stand sovereign until your final day. Men who build financial self-sovereignty, physical resilience, meaningful contribution, personal knowledge systems, and philosophical frameworks don't just age, they mature with purpose and dignity. The alternative isn't comfortable dependence, it's slow erasure of self. Remember, chaos isn't just around you, it's within you when you abdicate responsibility for your own existence. The universe rewards order, not wishful thinking. So I ask you, will you be the architect of your final chapters, or merely an increasingly faded character in someone else's story?